Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Coding 101 is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This episode of Coding 101 is brought to you by Harry's. For guys who want a great shave experience for a fraction of what you're paying now, go to harrys.com. Get $5 off your first purchase by entering the code C101 when you check out. Today on Coding 101, it's a Wildcard episode with Todd Perkins, plus a super special guest announcement. Hello and welcome to Coding 101. It's a Twitch show where we let you into the wonderful world of the Code Warrior / Code Monkey. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, and joining me today in studio is our very own Lou Maresca. Lou, thank you very much for coming up.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, we get to say something super special. We normally call you our super special guest co-host. We've been doing that for, 2 months now?
Yep.
But there have been a few movements here at Twit, and we wanted to keep the magic going so we can make the announcement that Lou Maresca is becoming the official co-host of Coding 101. Congratulations.
Thank you. Super excited. Super excited.
You do realize now that this means you have to do all the work.
I know.
I
know.
Enjoy. No, but we are incredibly happy to have Lou on board. It's nice to have someone who's actively engaged in programming to be part of the show. Lou has been with us since before episode 1. He was actually part of our beta episodes. He was our first Code Warrior. You've come back in fact, you've probably been on at least 40% of the episodes of the show. So you are no stranger to our audience.
Definitely not.
Yeah. Well, Lou, let's go ahead and jump right in, as
good.
we normally do, with a little bit of news. Now, this first one, I think you are uniquely suited to help us figure out what's going on. In the new version of C#, that's C# 6.0, they've added a new null propagation operator, it's just a question mark. Tell me, why did they do that? What does it do? And is it something you're going to use?
Of course. So they actually have multiple names for it. One's called the null conditional operator. They have many different names. But basically, if you've ever written a piece of software, especially around objects or classes, you have to do a lot of null checking. One thing is, if you don't actually create an instance of an object, and then you try to use some of the properties in that object, it will fail and it'll say null. You'll get a null reference exception. And so this little tiny question mark adds the ability to do that automatically. So what it'll do is it'll do a null check, and then if it actually will turn null rather than throw an exception if it's actually null. So like for instance, if I don't create an instance of a person object and then I try to access like their age or their height, it will fail and say no reference. But what this little operator will do is it will just say, instead of throwing an exception, it will return a null. So this way I can do a null check and then say, oh, okay, return a null. I should probably create an instance of it before I access it.
Okay, now Lou, it sounds interesting and it's a good idea.
Sure.
I mean, it's definitely something that people are going to be doing all the time, so that's good. But I will also hear people saying that this is just sprinkling sugar. I mean, this is one of those things that, yes, it comes in handy, but if you get too used to having it in a particular language, then you kind of forget how things actually work when you program in a different language.
Right.
What's your take? Is this just sugar, or is this something that you think will stay for the long haul?
It's nice. It's a nice thing to have because it doesn't bloat your code. So what you'll notice is as you do coding with big pieces of software, you do tons of null checks all over the place. And some people forget to do it, and then you have big problems. But you'll see a lot of if statements of if is null, then do this. If not null, then do that. And so this operator will reduce the code size, the code bloat. But another thing is there are some problems with it too. Like you could forget that you are doing it. Which means that, and also if you're using it against value types, like for instance integers or doubles or any of these types of value types, if you use it, it's actually what they call boxing it into an object, which creates more memory bloat in your application in order to return what they call a nullable type. So this way you can return an int nullable version of that type. And so the key to that is it's bloating your software. So you're bloating your memories for your software. So I mean, that also increases the lifetime of the object. There's lots of other problems. And then the thing is, you can also have multiple inline properties. So for instance, let's say I had, I had a property called extremities on a person object, and also one of the properties on the extremity is the legs or the arms, and I wanted to access those. So it's an inline sub property.
Right.
So those sub properties also might be null. So then you might have a bunch of question marks in line all the way down, and then you don't really know which ones of those are actually null. So you'll just return null, and you'll say, okay, which one was null? I don't know. So you get confused. So there's a lot of bad things that can happen, but as long as you're paying attention to what you're doing, you should be okay. But really the main thing is just to reduce the code size.
Before the question mark, before they actually gave us a dedicated operator for this, how would you check for that state?
So you would just do an if statement, and then you would do the object, and then the dot, and then the property. So let's say person object dot height, and then you say equal null. Is it, this way you check to see if it's null. If it is, then you do something. Let's say you create an instance of it, a new, height object, right? Or, you check if it's not equal to null, then I can go and access the height and do something with that height information. So that's usually the main pattern, is they just check to see if it isn't null, then go and get the value from it.
Right. So yeah, it's a little bit sugary, but at the same time, you should be doing this.
Right.
Every single time. You should be checking to see if a value is null before you work on it.
Right.
So, good, bad? What's your take?
Yeah, I think it'll be a good pattern to follow. Like I said, don't overuse it. I mean, anytime you overuse something, it's always it gets confusing for the person actually reading the code, and somebody who's debugging into the code. That's another thing, is if you see multiple inlines of these question marks, again, you don't really understand which one's returning null. So sometimes it gets confusing. But if you have one level deep of just like an object and its properties, then I'd say it's okay to use and go ahead and do it.
Or as Bleep Blurp in the chat room says, what are your intentions with my variable, sir?
That's right.
That's basically what we're talking about. All right, let's go ahead and move on to something else. Now, this came out of last week's episode. We talked a little bit about Docker, specifically that Microsoft was taking a new approach to Docker. They're wrapping it into their virtualization solution. Right. So you can go between Hyper and Docker without really even thinking about it. But we had a bunch of people write in, probably 24 people, either in email or in Twitter or in the G+ group, who actually wanted to know a little bit more about Docker. Sure. They hadn't heard about Docker, they hadn't used Docker. And sometimes I forget, not everyone is keeping up on the latest and the greatest from the data center.
Of course, yeah.
So I thought maybe we could just have a little chit-chat about what Docker is and what it's not. Because one of the things that people were propagating on the group was, it's just virtualization. It's a VM.
Right.
We've done VMs. We both know it's not. Docker is very much not a VM. So they kind of function the same way in that you can package something, but the difference between a Docker container, and a VM is that a VM contains a full operating system. You spin it up. It is a virtual machine. It's just as if you had bare metal you're running an operating system on, and then you run services on top of that. Whereas a container, it's super lightweight. It's ridiculous. I mean, it strips away all that OS stuff, all that abstraction. You can run it on bare metal. Basically, anything that's running Linux should, with the right hooks, be able to support a container. So they do the same thing, kind of, but definitely not the same. I mean, right? And that's my take.
Yeah. I mean, what people forget is that Docker's more of a toolkit. It's a way for you to create a distribution engine for your VM. So like, for instance, if you create an instance of Linux and you want to have other people contribute to that, Docker's the way to do that. It lets you kind of add to the operating system, add an application, and then commit that change to Docker, and then people who spin up that VM later will actually see the change, whatever that maybe you added, some other application that you wanted on there.
Right.
So that's kind of the key, is it's a distribution engine more.
Yeah. And actually, ESO in the chat room brings up a very good point. And this is kernel talk, but VM, essentially what you're doing is you're splitting the hardware. You're going down to the bare metal. Whereas with Docker, you're actually splitting the kernel. But it splits the kernel in a way that you can have completely self-sufficient, self-contained, independent containers. They don't have to have anything to do with each other unless you actually want them to, unless you want the services to communicate with one another. Now, some of the things that I've learned about Docker, because it is fantastically efficient, and it is fantastically effective and mobile. I can take a Docker container that I've written, I can run it on my Synology NAS, and I can also run it, let's see, we've got a list of some of the different services that it'll work on. It will work on Amazon Web Services. It will work on Microsoft Azure. It will work on Google Cloud Platform, OpenStack Nova, OpenSVC, Salt, Vagrant Chef, and about a dozen others. Right. So that ability to sort of write it once and basically push it private, public, cloud, premise, whatever it's going to be. Right. It's a very attractive way. But it's also lightweight. It's very, very lightweight, very portable, and very, very highly distributable.
Yep. And it's funny because even the syntax around it, like once you're committing things to it, is very similar if you ever used Git before for your code repository, where you're committing and pulling things down and pushing things up. The Docker engine and its toolkit is very similar to that. So you can push changes to a VM, through Docker using the push and pull, pull the changes down, push the changes up. So it's kind of neat, and that's really where the power of Docker comes into as well.
Yeah. So the reason why we bring this up is we will be doing a few projects and a few modules in the very near future where you can write your apps as a container, which actually really eases how you deploy them. In fact, we're going to be bringing in, I can't talk about, I just realized I can't, we may be, I think May dismisses me from all culpability. We may be bringing in a sponsor that specializes in you taking services and spinning them up. I think that
sounds good to me.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go with that. Now, when we come back, we're going to go ahead and speak with Todd Perkins. He is a self-taught programmer, a master of iOS. We want to bring him back. We want to bring him into the Coding 101 family because we know we've been a little remiss in iOS. We're 60-plus episodes, and we haven't done anything for
I love iOS. I want to get into it deep.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go there for you. But before we go there, I thought it might be a good time to talk about the sponsor for this episode of Coding 101, and it's Harry's. Now, Lou, let me ask you, how do you shave? Do you have an electric razor? Do you like the old
I've tried all types. My hair grows so fast that I tried the electric, tried everything.
This is like 3 weeks of growth for me. So not so fast for me, but fast for you.
Yes, very.
But, it's funny because the very first shaver I got was electric, and I thought it was great. I'm done. But then when I started actually shaving, I kind of like that feel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just something you do, it's kind of something you experience,
That's
right? The problem is, I've at least found, is that the experience gets marred by what I have to do to shave. My personal favorite is going to a supermarket and seeing all the blades locked away behind some gate because they're made out of gold or contain uranium or something, right? You get treated like a criminal. Yeah. Well, folks, you don't have to do that if you've got Harry's. Now, Zach's going to show you what a Harry's kit looks like. It is a premium piece of kit. It allows you to have a smooth shaving experience again and again and again. Now, let's admit it. Shaving can't be fun unless, of course, you make it fun. Unless, of course, you make it part of the experience. And that's what Harry's is all about. They give you the tools, the lotions, the cream to make it not just something that you do for personal hygiene, but something that you do for personal health. I don't want to spend hundreds on razors and bother with going to the store, so I use Harry's to get all of my supplies delivered to my door. They give us high-quality razors at about half the price of those big brand blades. Now, they make all their own razors in their own factory in Germany. They engineer them for sharpness and high performance. Harry ships them for free to your front door, and because they make and ship their own blades, Harry's is a more efficient company, which translates into factory direct pricing. Harry's guarantees your satisfaction. In each kit, you get a razor with a handle that looks and feels great, 3 razor blades, and foaming shave gel. The starter kit, the Truman, is an amazing deal, and you get all of it for just $15. I've been using Harry's for a while now. It gives me a clean, close, and comfortable shave, and I love the look and the feel of the set. And I got to tell you, I also love the price. Harry's cost half as much as the razors at the store, like Gillette or Fusion, and they also have a new aftershave moisturizer that protects and hydrates my skin. Oh, here's what we want you to do. We want you to turn shaving into an experience. Go to harrys.com and get $5 off your first purchase with the code C101. That's HARRYS.com and enter the code C101 at checkout. That's right, Harry's for a close shave. And we thank Harry's for their support of Coding 101. We now welcome to the show a man who I've been wanting to talk to for a while, Mr. Todd Perkins. Todd, thank you very much for being on Coding 101.
Hello.
Welcome.
Oh, Todd, it's interesting because if someone were to look at the work, the corpus of your work online, I think they would notice 2 things. First is that you are very heavily invested into iOS. And that's your bailiwick, that's your expertise. And the second is you are a self-proclaimed, self-taught programmer.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me, why did you get into computers and computer science?
Well, if you want the long story, I guess it's not that long, but when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, my dad he was a programmer, and he used to give me like logic puzzle books, and he taught me kind of an appreciation for math. And fast forward, about 10 years, I was in a punk rock band, and I was into cartoons, and I got a hold of Flash. And my brother, who was also in the band, asked me to do our website with Flash. And so I learned really basic, kind of built-in Flash programming with Flash 5. And then, from there, I got a job doing graphic design, mostly like Photoshop work. And then I got asked to teach Flash. And then in teaching Flash, they asked me to teach ActionScript, so I had to learn ActionScript. And then I got a job with lynda.com. That's pretty much the whole story.
Now, Todd, I have to say, this is definitely the first origin story for programming that we've ever heard that involved the words punk rock. It seems a little different. That's definitely that's definitely in your favor. That's a unique set of qualities there. But let me ask you. You seem to be speaking from a different generation of programmer, because you started with something that was very visual. I mean, Flash is very UI oriented. You design the UI, you make it beautiful. Whereas my old fart programmers typically started with, you do functionality first, and then the UI is something you staple on at the end. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about growing up with Flash.
Well, I was just always into cartoons and everything. I didn't think of myself as, a mathematical guy. I thought of myself as a creative guy. And so I always wanted to make cartoons, and, I wanted to be like a comic book artist and stuff. So I got really into just creating stupid animations with Flash. And I was also always into video games. And so it felt like Flash was just kind of a natural progression from going to cartoony stuff and to making it interactive and everything. And so that's kind of what propelled me into programming, just the desire to convert my animations into maybe simple games and stuff.
Cool. So Todd, since you've kind of learned yourself and you're self-taught, how did you learn your craft? What languages did you start with? And over the years, how did you kind of learn other different languages and so on?
Well, I started with ActionScript, which is the language that's used in Flash. And this was maybe 15 years ago or so. And from there, I got a job teaching Flash, and then the same people wanted me to teach Dreamweaver. And, it was kind of an Adobe products type thing. So I would teach Dreamweaver, and I had to be an expert in HTML and CSS and JavaScript and et cetera. And so, that's how I got into those, like the web languages. And when I started working for lynda.com, they had me do a lot of Flash stuff. And so I, kind of like I do iOS now, I did Flash back then. This was about 6 years ago. And so I would do all Flash stuff, and then they had me start branching out into Java and then really into iOS mostly.
So you've really made your living in the web languages. I mean, that's your bread and butter. That's where you were formed, and that's where your skill set really lies.
Yeah, that's where my background is. I spent the last 3 or 4 years mostly doing iOS, but up until then, it was mostly web languages. Pretty much all web languages, yeah.
So I do have to ask, because with such a background in Flash and ActionScript, iOS doesn't seem so natural of a transition, especially with what happened between iOS and Flash. What pushed you in that direction? I mean, web languages could pretty much go anywhere, but you have really, at least now, you've settled into the iOS groove. Why from Flash to iOS?
Well, I think what you said, what happened with Flash and iOS, that's kind of what pushed me into iOS. Since then, Flash has kind of become less popular, and so there's been less of a demand for it. And again, I've always been interested in making games, and in 2008, with the introduction of the App Store and everybody's making games and talking about how easy it is to get into that in iOS, I really wanted to learn how to do that. And so a desire to make games, combined with a need for my work, in teaching iOS pushed me in that direction. So it seems weird, but it was actually kind of natural. And there was a time there where Adobe had just introduced creating iOS games using Flash. And so that was kind of the gateway into making full-fledged iOS apps.
All right, so we've got two people here who were actually programmers during the whole Flash, I'm not going to call it debacle, but the debacle, where you had, it was a very strange time. I mean, this was not that long ago that browsers all supported Flash. All the multimedia stuff was out in Flash. People thought, okay, well, that's what you need if you want rich content. But then you had a cadre of elite programmers, especially people who were doing iOS, who were saying, no, Flash is a hog. Flash is horrible. Flash will kill your grandmother. Todd, let me start with you. I mean, where were you? I mean, here you are. You grew up with Flash, and now you're hearing, well, if you want to continue in iOS, you got to stick the stagger to the heart of Flash.
It was weird. I actually was making a living off of Flash at the time, pretty much exclusively. So I would teach Flash in my video trainings. I've written a few books in Flash. I had just published the Flash Bible, and then, as Flash is kind of dying out, I guess you could say, we come up this revelation where people are just realizing that Flash is a hog, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And since then, it's kind of been dying out, and so yeah, it was a weird transition, but I think as a programmer, you really have to adapt or you don't survive, and I chose to adapt.
Yep.
Let me ask you that. We now know that Flash was a hog, and yeah, at the time that it happened, I'm like, oh, stupid Apple. I mean, come on, everything's Flash. Why wouldn't I want Flash? Give me at least the option to have Flash. Right. And then eventually even Android went in the same direction. Why did we put up with it for so long? Was it just there's no other option?
I think it was like the age of virtual machines. It's like the Silverlight came out. Java has its virtual machines, so a lot of Java programming even before Flash. I think that was the kind of the age they thought, oh well, if we can build a whole bunch of add-ons to the browser where the browsers fall short, I think that's kind of the key. And so I think they were, that was where that was at that time. But then Apple was kind of brave because Flash was so big. They said, you know what? We want raw native power, and we're not going to add on to the browser. We want raw native power. We want people to build native apps for our platform, and so that's what they did. They decided for that.
Both of you'll remember this. Okay, we're gonna go off the rails for just a second. We're getting into geek nostalgia. When all of this was happening, what I found fascinating was all these old wounds got opened up because people started talking about, yeah, that's right, that's what you get, Adobe, for not doing such and such for the Mac way back when. And it was hilarious because the drama was playing out as if this is Apple being malicious to someone that they felt wronged them decades ago.
Right.
Where the programmers I knew were saying, no, we got to do this. I mean, there's not as much power on my mobile device as my laptop. I can't afford to have 100% usage to play an ad.
That's right.
Did you experience that, Todd? I mean, when did you make the transition and say, okay, I'm going to ditch Flash because I do want to do iOS?
It was really after, kind of around the time that Adobe started releasing the Air stuff, and they started to get into desktop publishing and making iOS stuff. It really just felt like I just got the vibe that Flash was dying out, and I would see it used less and less on the web, and iOS has been growing in popularity, or at the time it was growing a lot, and yeah, it was right around that time when it just seemed like Flash was just trying to do too much, and it didn't really have an identity.
Well, you bet on the right horse. That feels good, right?
Yes, it does.
Right? Because I actually know I know some people who stayed with Flash to the bitter end, and even now they're only starting to give up, which is sad. Yeah. It's a little bit sad. All right. Let me ask you about this. This is a discussion that we've had on this show every once in a while, where we talk about programmers versus coders, and we've got it's a very specific question that exists basically only in Coding 101. We've heard from a couple of people that anyone who will put in the work can become a coder. I mean, you can figure out syntax and you can figure out what goes where and you can copy examples and you know how to solve certain problems because you've seen them before and you know what kind of logic tree you're going to need in order to solve the problem. But then there's another type of person, and that's the programmer. And the programmer actually comes up with innovative thought, can do things that the coder can't do, and has sort of innate abilities that you can't teach. They just kind of have. They've got that passion for problem solving. Where would you stand on that?
On the existence of the idea, or what kind of programmer am I?
Oh, no. We're not going to get, no, this is the first date.
Okay.
We're not going to go there. But what I mean is, do you think is there that separation? Do you see it? Because you've taught a lot. Do you see people who just, they pick it up and then they exceed you? They go past what you taught them. And some people who can only do what they've been taught.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's like you were saying, the coder is kind of the robotic or the kind of mathematical brain kind of thinking of, just doing the work. And the programmer requires, I think, more creative brain. And I think that can be taught. I think if somebody wants to become that kind of developer, then it's definitely possible. But I think it does require the passion. It requires caring about building something cool. And yeah.
Describe something that you built that you thought was cool. I mean, and tell me about the process that went into it. So from the time that you came up with the idea to figuring out what actually needs to go into it, the resources that you have to gather, and then final execution. What does it look like when you're developing?
Well, the first thing that came to mind when you're saying that is just a game that I built. And one of the more recent ones I built, it's called 8-Bit Baseball. And we decided, I had a team, and we decided to go with a pixel art style, kind of a retro feel. And there is something exciting about writing code when you're working on a team and you're all building something together. And with the games that we make, I kind of get to be the leader of the team, the Leonardo of the Ninja Turtles, if you will. And planning out how all the gameplay elements are going to work and writing the code and kind of guiding our artist along the way and everything. And it's awesome. It's a really cool experience. And it feels more like creating art than it does, robotically creating a machine or something like that.
So Todd, when you teach, what do you look for in your students? What impresses you? What's something that can really change your mind about a student when they start working?
I like people who just come in with a desire to learn new stuff and who don't have the chip on their shoulder of feeling like they already know everything and can't learn anything new.
Yeah.
And I've ran into people of, all across the spectrum in teaching at different places and different people and everything. And yeah, those people that are just humble enough to accept that they don't know everything, those people are just awesome to teach.
You must run into it because, I mean, this is your industry. You must run into the old, grizzled, battle-scarred command line programmers who did something way back when, and now they're trying to learn something that's a bit more visual, it's a bit more web-oriented. What's the most difficult thing, and this is an expansion on Lou's question, what's the most difficult thing to get them to understand?
I think sometimes it's difficult to get people to understand that they just don't know everything. I've had kind of arguments when I've been teaching, which is super awkward. I'm teaching a public class and one of the students kind of wants to pick a verbal fight with me and disagree on something and well, that's not how we do it in this language. And
I'm going to go off the rails there. Pick your favorite fight. Tell me what your favorite. I so want to hear this because I've had this happen to me before. What's a fight that someone just dug their heels in on and saying, "No, you're wrong. That's not how you do it. This is the way you do it."
Well, I remember teaching. Really, the guy wasn't wrong. It was just he wouldn't accept that I was doing it in an appropriate way, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But this is the one that sticks out. Is I was showing how to add interactivity for a button in Flash in ActionScript, And I was saying, okay, this is the code that you write. You set the on-release property to a function. And he was like, why don't you just override it in the subclass? And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing right here. We don't, with ActionScript and Flash, you're not always looking at the superclass, And he was really adamant that, you need to override it in the subclass and just kind of wouldn't accept that that's what I was doing. And I just, politely said, okay, we're good. We're going to move on, but he seemed pretty bothered. Like, I didn't know what I was talking about.
You run into that. I mean, that's a dev problem. I can imagine that happening around the table every day.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's a religious thing. People do different things different ways, and like for me, I like to put inline comments versus comments above the line, and people kind of blow up about that. You're adding more code to the line, blah blah blah. I mean, there's lots of little tiny things as small as that, and even as big as like you're saying, overriding functionality. So there's you're going to have those wars all the time, especially with the people who know what they're doing.
By the way, Todd, I'd just like you to know that in the chat room, you've now sparked the mindless code monkey fight. So congratulations.
Yay!
Well done, sir. Well done.
So Todd, I've actually noticed that I did a little bit of recognizance on your kind of your background, your history, and I noticed you kind of gravitated more towards game development. Why do you think you've done that?
I have always liked games since the 80s, the Mega Man 2s and et cetera. And so, I still play games today. I'm super passionate about gaming, and I just want to be able to make eventually, something really cool that has an impact on a huge amount of people. So,
do you think you grab more people when you build games, like of all ages or just a certain age set?
I think the best thing to do is just build something that you love and that you would want to play. And for me, sometimes I want to play the really mature games, and sometimes I want to play the fart app games, the just really immature, goofy stuff. And I think both can be very rewarding. Just as long as you approach the right audience and don't try to mix things that shouldn't be mixed.
Todd, I want to get your thoughts on this. I was at a developers conference probably about 4 months ago, and I was listening to this female programmer speak, and she was saying how, especially in the visual age, where everything GUI first, everything has become a game. If you're doing an app right, if you're doing a game, any program right, there has to be game elements. In other words, there has to be rewards for certain actions. They have to be able to notice that something good has happened. And I mean, this was her long-winded way to say everyone needs at least a little bit of game development in them. You have to understand how to get people to continue to participate with the process that you set down before them. The example she gave was perfect. It was an indie game. Meat Boy, Super Meat Boy, which I
love that game.
I love that game. It's so much fun. But she explained how there are no instructions whatsoever. There's no tutorial. There's no manual that comes with the game. It's just that in the first 5 minutes of picking up this game, because you will naturally try to do certain things, you will learn all the controls very quickly. And she said, that's how I try to design my apps, even when they're not games. Is that something that you're starting to see in people who are making apps?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a legitimate approach. I mean, I personally need that if I'm going to use an exercise app, some kind of mental reward for a mental cookie, if you will, for running or eating right or something like that. I love that idea, and I think it's maybe it's not necessary, but if you want your app to be successful and you want people to get addicted to it, then you want to have those addictive qualities that games can have.
Right. Todd, let me ask you this. We do want to invite you back to be a code warrior. We haven't done anything for iOS. Of course, we're going to want you to come in and actually show our audience how to start developing for iOS. But before we get to that, because that will take a while, what are some of the nuggets of knowledge that you can offer? Because obviously you've been in this game for a long time. You've made that transition into iOS. You have consciously decided that you want to develop for that platform. What are some of the things that you think people can avoid, like first mistakes that they can avoid, then some things that they should do as they prepare themselves to actually program for iOS. In other words, what kind of knowledge can you give to our audience?
So as far as mistakes that you can avoid, well, that's a hard one. I mean, coming into iOS for me, I tried to think of it kind of like Java or ActionScript, and it's really not like that. But if you're going to go, what I would do, honestly, right now is you've heard Apple talk about Swift if you watched WWDC last year. I would hold off on Swift. If you're going to get into iOS, I would start with Objective-C. And the reason for that is not majorly, but Apple changes Swift every couple of months. And it's to the point where when I record a course, I have to go back and change almost the entire thing because of code that Apple has added. And one of those things is kind of like the question marks that you guys were talking about earlier with checking for null and everything. Right. And they had that in Swift, but they change it every couple of months how they're going to implement it. And so I would say Swift feels like a beta language right now. So if you're going to learn iOS, start with Objective-C, definitely. Maybe Swift will be in a few months after the next WWDC. Maybe it'll be ready for prime time. For right now, I'd stick with Objective-C. So that's the first thing. Other than, that's really mostly what I have for specific iOS. But if you want general programming tips, I can give those as well. So if you'd like to hear those.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just think of, there was a story about, there was a guy that emailed me a year ago, and I don't get these all the time. I get these like once every 5 years or something. But this guy wrote me an email, and he told me that I changed his life. And, he's like, your tutorials have been so awesome and helped me out. And he ended up not knowing programming at all. And he went to getting a job as a programmer and becoming a senior developer over the course of just like a year or two.
Wow.
And so I think if you're new getting into programming, understand that it's not too late for a career change, because this guy did it. And, for me personally, I went from knowing no programming whatsoever to writing a book on programming in just a couple of years. And so I'd give that advice. Definitely learn how to use Google. If you have a problem, somebody else has had that problem before, so look it up. I imagine you guys have probably talked about this a lot in this podcast, but that's a big one for me, is using Google. And just don't stop learning, because you never know when your language can become irrelevant. And if I wouldn't have continued to pursue other languages, then I would be out with the dinosaurs with Flash.
Super good advice. Super good advice. So we talked a little bit about iOS and how you said Swift is kind of a beta language. Do you find that even switching between the different versions of iOS can sometimes require you to transition? Does your knowledge transition, or do you have to learn a lot of new things even when developing for iOS?
In the versions of iOS, it stays pretty much the same. Obviously, there's going to be new APIs and that kind of stuff. But usually the bread and butter is not much different. Occasionally a method call will have a new name, or you'll create an object in a slightly different way, but usually that's insignificant and pretty easily handled.
Right. Todd, I do want to take a little time to talk about Lynda, because Lynda is where you now live. That's where your work goes. That's where your lessons can be found. And full disclaimer, hopefully everyone who watches the show knows, Lynda is sometimes an advertiser on Coding 101. They're not this episode. We just wanted Todd on, and he happens to work for Lynda. Could you tell us a little bit about the philosophy that goes into taking your lessons and turning into something online? Because I've taught in person, and it can be daunting to try to turn that into an online lesson where you think everyone is going to be able to follow along with what you're saying without any interactivity.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit, it might be like for you, like doing a podcast. You just imagine that there's people there listening to you when they aren't, and that's what I do too. So yeah, there is it's definitely different, If I'm teaching a class, I can make jokes, I can use my body language and pretend to be a robot or something like that, which I know sounds ridiculous right now, but I view in context, it totally works, and it's a useful teaching tool. But yeah, you don't get that same feedback. And in a class, when somebody asks a question, you can pivot and focus on that. Maybe you've missed needs for the whole class and you forgot to, and you can adjust when somebody asks a question in class. Whereas when I'm talking to my computer all alone, I have to anticipate what questions people might have and answer them without them ever being asked. So it's definitely more difficult, but it's also fun too. It's a challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah. Todd Perkins, he is a self-taught programmer, a guru of iOS. We do want to thank you for being on this episode of Coding 101. We are going to have you back. If you agree, we definitely want to have you back to be the code warrior in an actual programming module on the show. Would you be interested in an invite?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I think our audience have been clamoring for a while. Now, the funny part is the messages that we've been getting is they want us to teach Swift. And Lou and yourself have both told me, not yet, not yet. So this is good.
You can learn Swift, but it's just, know that it's going to change. It's going to change.
It's a great language, too. It's actually really well done.
Yeah, I love Swift. It's just, it's not going to be the same in a few months from now.
Let the other guy program in Swift, and you come in a year when everything is settled and fully baked, and you'll be much happier. But we'll bring you in for Objective-C because our folks do want to start programming for iOS. Even if you're not an iOS user, it's a good skill to have. Let's be honest, it's where the money is. Okay, I'm being perfectly honest right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Lou, should I be programming for Windows Phone?
Yeah. There's a lot of things free on Windows Phone, I know.
That's true. Very true. I'm sorry, Todd, could you please tell us where people can find you? Of course, they're going to find you on Lynda, so I could give my standard pitch. They'll find your courses step by step. They'll be able to find transcripts. They'll be able to find your videos. If they're interested, they should at least go check them out. But where else can they find Todd Perkins?
You can find me, Ask Todd, on Twitter.
There we go. Todd Perkins, he will be our future code warrior. For now, he is our code guru. And, sir, we salute you. Folks, we know that this was a lot. This is a Wildcard episode. Remember, we're sort of cleansing the pot. We did a little bit of programming. Then we bring in people that we're interested in. We're going to try to do this often. We want to show you people who actually have experience in the field that you're trying to get into. That's pretty much what Coding 101 is all about. But we do have a super special module coming up for you. We will be talking about Ruby and Ruby on Rails. So if you do want to start getting into web programming, visual side of programming, as Todd started off with, you're going to want to stick around. Now, again, in case you weren't here for the start of the show, we did have that super special guest co-host announcement that Lou will no longer be the super special guest co-host. He is the official co-host of Coding 101. And seriously, Lou, it's about freaking time. I mean, you've been on this show so often.
I just want to get rid of my title, though. I really like that super special custom.
Well, you won't fit in your lower third. So, actually, that's the real reason why we asked Lou to come on, because we can't put it in it's expensive to have all that space used up in the TriCaster. But where can people find you?
You can always find me on Twitter, LouMM, L-O-U-M-M, as well as all my daily work where at Microsoft is found at crm.dynamics.com.
And don't forget that you can find all of our back episodes at our show page. Just go to twit.tv/coding101 or code. It all goes to the same place. You'll find previous episodes, previous modules. So if you want to catch up on C or C# or PHP, or maybe you want to look at the episodes that we did for Python, you can find it all there. Just download it. We make it easy for you to get, along with links to the code. Now, we've been having issues the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure why the code's not going up. It's probably because I programmed that part of the site, and I think I broke it. I'm going to fix it. While Lou is here, I'm going to fix it so you can make sure that you can get all the code so you can follow along with the assets. Also, don't forget that you can follow me on Twitter. Just go to twitter.com/PadreSJ. That's at PadreSJ. If you go there, you'll find out what we're going to be doing before each episode of Coding 101, as well as being able to suggest guests and topics for future episodes of Coding 101. Don't forget that we do this show live every Monday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. You can go to live.twit.tv and find out what we do pre-show, post-show, what happens during the show that gets cut out of the final version. And as long as you're watching live, please jump into the Twit TV chat room at irc.twit.tv. We like to read your comments. We like to hear your questions. We'd like to relay them across to our guests. We can't do that unless you join us. Until the next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer.
I'm Lou Maresca.
And our TD is Zach, Eskimo Zach. And this has been Coding 101. End of line.